Hi, I'm Margaret Carhill from the Wessex Astrologer, and I'm really pleased that you can join me for a chat with Martin Sebastian Moritz, who's the author of one of our latest books, Pandora's Box, The Mysterious Eighth House. Martin, it's great to talk to you. One thing I'd really like to get out of the way is how relevant is this book for somebody who hasn't got anything in the eighth house? Because I haven't got anything in the eighth house. And I can imagine a lot of people saying, well, that's not really relevant to me because if I haven't got anything in there, it doesn't actually matter. So if that's one of the things you could cover, that'd be really good.
Okay, so let's share some slides so I can shed some light. If I only knew how to do it. Hold on. I have done hundreds of Zoom meetings and I still am lost. Hold on. There we go. Yes, there we go. So, all right. So, okay. So, first of all, Margaret, I quite agree that many people don't have much of an idea of how all-encompassing and complex the eighth house is. And before we shed some light on many of these issues, let's pick up your question, which was, how can I benefit from your book if I, for one, don't have any placement at all in the eighth house? Is that so?
Yeah, and I don't, there's not many people I'm involved with who have anything in the eighth house either, so that's really relevant.
Yeah, so many astrologers do the technique of rulership, and of course every house, well, I mean, whether it'll be packed or empty, has always a ruler, because the cusp is always in one sign, and that sign, of course, makes for the ruler. So let's take this example, shall we? So here we have an empty eighth house, right? So at first glance, you would presume, well, this person can't be much of an eighth house person, but well, that's not true, because the ruler, obviously, for Taurus is Venus. Venus is placed in her exile in Aries and in the seventh house, and receives, so we can't count the opposition because it's dissociated, but what we absolutely can factor in is that Saturn and Jupiter both are placed at the end of Capricorn, so they form a square to Venus. And also we have Uranus by trine. So you would say the ruler of the eighth in the seventh. Shall we explore on that? That means that where the Venus is coming from is sort of her hidden agenda, what her motives are. And her motives, when she comes out of the eighth house, have to do with shared values, the values of others, with debts, with inheritances, I hate that word, inheritances. Is there a plural? So one inheritance, two inheritances?
That's right.
Yes.
Lucky person.
Yeah, sounds brilliant. Inheritances. Okay. And of course, crises and...
Crisis and crises.
Yeah. And that's a funny story, and I have to just share it with you, because my English teacher, who was British, and I mean, he's sharp as a knife normally, and he came across this plural word of crises, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, one crisis and several crises and crises." And he said, "No. it's crises. I said, are you sure? And then, of course, he looked it up on the internet, where you can also listen in to proper pronunciations. And we both laughed our heads off, because he said, well, that's so German of you, because we British just have one crisis after another, and you Germans, you must have several. So you have the plural. So
Good one.
yeah. So Venus, if you will, brings a lot of baggage into the partnership. And this is an example of a client of mine who came to me because she was so unhappy. She inherited a beautiful old house from her grandmother. And she and her husband, a policeman, took on a loan in order to refurbish it. You know, everything had to be done from scratch. And after that, she was all over the moon, saying like, oh, brilliant. And now I can start to decorate everything into the garden and buy lovely furniture and, you know, pictures and lamps and the lot, you know. But her husband says, no, we have run out of money, and I'm not sitting on any bloody furniture on which I haven't paid for properly. So he forced her to be content with what was basically more or less an empty house with secondhand faded furniture. And then she lost her job. Then he ran into a depression. And as the house deteriorated, so did the marriage. So this is, of course, a thrilling story, but how does the chart come into this? Well, it's actually that every matter concerning her Venus in the 7th house, so of course the house of partnership, involves difficulties, you know, these squares with Jupiter and Saturn in the 4th house, as a matter of fact, right sitting on the IC. So that's, if you will, her inheritance in form of her house. So on the one hand, it comes to her as good luck, you know, Jupiter. I mean, how brilliant is that, to inherit a whole house? But on the other hand, it comes in the form of Saturn as well. And that's, of course, like, yeah, it comes with various restrictions, if you will. And of course, the strain was also on her partnership. And by the time she came to me to seek advice, the two of them were barely speaking with each other. And she had taken up a lover. And when her husband wasn't in the house, she used to like dream, like, how can I get rid of this unloved husband? And this is my house after all. But of course, always then she realized it's only half my house, because in order to get rid of my husband, I have to pay him, you know, his share. And yeah, she had no means at all to pay him. So that was a really strenuous situation. And I think the chart is a perfect example of how the 8th house, in the form of inheritances and debts, and of course shared values, can plunge you, if you will, in a deep crisis.
Interesting.
Okay. And of course, I mean, and you said before that one of the big pluses of the book is are the sections where any reader can like have a good check on which combination applies to him or her. So I have chapters on the rulerships, so ruler of the 8th and the 2nd house, ruler of the 8th and the 12th house, and so on and so forth, and vice versa. And of course, what is if you have Pluto in the 8th house? What is with the Sun in the 8th house? Plus, there is a whole sections about transits through the 8th house, because even if you don't happen to have placement in your 8th house, of course, it'll experience a transit every now and then. For example, if Saturn goes through the 8th house, it's usually sort of payback time, and that life wants something back from you and you have to deal with that. Okay.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So I wouldn't have thought of that before.
So just to give an overall impression of what the 8th house is all about, at the bottom is always the need. This is what is in psychology called resilience, which is more or less the ability to not just to soldier through, but to sort of adapt to life and its challenges, and that after each crisis you are a new born person, if you will. It's like a snake shedding its skin, and beneath that old layer of skin is a fresh layer of skin, but that's of course still vulnerable and needs care. So in order to transform ourselves, we have to experience all these unfortunate issues like trespassings, visits to the underworld, facing expectations and fixations, dramas, and, well, I mean, sex is not necessarily something unfortunate. I mean, it depends, but of course, sex has a lot to do with fixations and with who has the upper hand. I mean, anyone who has had his or her heart broken will agree that this is a life-changing experiment. So yeah, that's that. And also here are some of the protagonists about whom I write in the book. So it's not only a book where you can look up your own placements, it's also a book which tries to explain to the reader what the 8th house is all about. And all these protagonists share one thing. They all had in their lives important, crucial 8th house challenges, if you will. So be it Truman Capote, be it John Dee, be it Kaiser Wilhelm II, be it Tab Hunter, be it Doris Day, be it Adolf Eichmann, be it Queen Victoria and Princess Beatrice, be it RuPaul. So these are only examples, but I tried to make it, if you will, entertaining as well. So it's not only like brooding on how horrible the 8th house is. No, the bright side is that it's terribly entertaining and enlightening, and that you really sit there and feel like, oh, cross fingers that these people will, you know, soldier through. And often it has an unexpected twist, if you will.
I think that's an interesting point, actually, because I know that when somebody puts up a chart and mentions the 8th house, and there's a kind of a collective intake of, you know, like, oh, don't want to talk about that, or oh, it must be terrible if you've got the sun in the 8th house, or it's almost like doom laden, isn't it? And these people, I mean, especially RuPaul, are kind of proof that out of difficulty can come, you know, a lot of advantage and happiness, and success, maybe, is what I want to say. You know,
yes.
It's a kind of constructive thing, depending on how you can go about it, which I suppose is dependent on the rest of the chart, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also it's a sort of inner fate. It's a sort of ticking time machine, not bomb, but we sort of, during the course of our individual lives, we all sort of come to face our taboos, our inner shadows, and where the shadows lie, this is where our deeper potential to self-growth also lies, because well, as I always say, anything which comes easy to you doesn't necessarily feel so self-empowering, whereas if you really had to fight for something and have to overcome your shyness or your inner restrictions, or you had to deal with inner demons which always tell you you're not good enough or so, and then you overcome yourself, and after that you can look into the mirror and actually pat yourself on the shoulder, because you can be proud on what you have accomplished. And of course, I'm a psychotherapist, so I'm dealing most of the time with couples, so I do couple therapy. And what I do is, on the one hand side, I confront them with their problems, but on the other hand, I always pat them on the shoulder, say, well, see, the reason you came here is because you want to get out of this terrible state of your relationship, and it's very brave of you to seek help, and that's the first step, so good for you. And every little step they take, and this like teensy weensy baby steps, lead to a better relationship, if you will. And even if they separate after that, which isn't so often the case, luckily, they part with a different feeling in a more adult way. You see, the 8th house is not a nice fun house. It's not it's more of an adult house. It goes under your skin, but once you're in it, you know, it's life altering, and you will feel, I mean, as you said, the benefit after it.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn a light on. Hang on.
Yeah.
If this is going to do it. There we go. Hooray! It's not too dark. Suddenly got dark. So I guess that's sparked by transits as well, isn't it? So that as you point out in the book, you know, that
Yes.
it's almost like the transit is going to kick off. Well, we know this, don't we? The transit is going to instigate that change.
Or if you meet other people who have planets in your 8th house, so they activate it, by all means. It's always thrilling when doing a synastry to trace where I put my planets in the other person's chart and vice versa. And people who put their planets, in a way, in a manner of speaking, into your 8th house, they will activate your 8th house. And it often comes by way of energy exchange. So this works very subtly. So we all want something out of relationships, and other people want something out from us. And as you can well imagine, it's seldom 50-50, like, give me 5,
No.
we're even. No, it's more often than not, then, well, I'm sure you know those people also who you meet and you feel like absolutely drained and knackered after that. And you feel, what the hell happened here? It was supposed to be like a friendly chat. No, they were like moaning or wanting something, and you feel drained. It's horrible.
Absolutely. So if you took the ruler of their 8th house and put it in your chart,
yes,
that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because then if you feel that you're being say you're with somebody in a relationship where you're being manipulated, and you couldn't quite understand why.
Yes.
You know, I'm thinking of sort of very difficult cases with people who are in difficult relationships. In that sense, that would give you a big insight, wouldn't it?
It would. Also, I mean, a good relationship is always, I mean, on a healthy note, give and take. And give and take is seldom 50-50, but sometimes in life is that one is more the beneficiary, if you will, and the other one like feeds the other person, but then it can go the other way around. I mean, look at my mum and dad. My dad always used to have poor health over the last 20 years. So my mum was very supportive, and all of a sudden my mum was dreadfully ill and had to go to hospital, and my dad was really worried. But now my mum says, oh no, he's very sweet and he's doing everything for me. And I said, well, and there you have it. It can go the other way around. It's just, you have to sit stuff out. And I think in modern society, we are made to believe that if we aren't happy with our partners, we can swap them to a fresh and new and younger model. And the market is so important, and find a new partner, start from afresh, blah, 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 blah. I think that's really a very narrow way of looking at the potential of difficult relationship, because at the end of the day, even if we swap one sort of partner with another one, we will end up with our own problems anyhow, because any partner would serve as a projection figure for our own faults, if you will. So
starting investigating your own eighth house,
yes,
planets or not, is actually the kind of the more powerful stance, isn't it? If you can understand that in yourself, then you've got more idea of how you're going to project that into a relationship or any kind of, you know, partnership, I guess, aren't you?
Sometimes it's like the ruler of the 7th and the 8th, if they fall into the same sign, would share this sort of inner drive. So the 7th house is more superficial, if you will. It's like whomever we meet, and it's all potential partners, be it romantically involved or business partners or the public at large. In modern, in classical astrology, or even open enemies. I mean, think of that. But it is only when we come into the 8th house that we experience intimacy. That's a very strong word for the 8th house. It's a very intimate place where we absolutely get to see the flaws of our partners. And I mean, just think of that. Well, I mean, for thousands and thousands of years, people have married for economical reasons and not for romance. This romantic approach towards partnerships is comparatively new if we look at the whole history of mankind. So the 8th house, again, is the I and the you become an us, and that necessitates a certain letting go of certain aspects of your personality. So you just mold yourself into this partnership, this couple image. And that can never be an easy task. I mean, how many honeymoons end up in, oh, I see, so that's who you are in reality. Like, yeah, cheers,
Can
mate.
I have a refund? No, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because it brings a whole new level to synastry. I know that we didn't actually start out talking about this, but
yeah,
it does actually bring a whole new level of understanding to synastry. But then you cover that in, especially in the Tab Hunter
yes,
case history. That's lovely, because
yeah,
you cover what he has to go through
exactly.
in the process of his life. Yeah.
And also, and what's also, I think, a very modern approach to the 8th house is that we are living in an age where, on the one hand side, youth is more celebrated than ever, but on the other hand, it's a new generation. It's the baby boomers, wouldn't you agree, who won't fade back into the gray and beige background, but demonstrate that you can start afresh, that you can have a full and meaningful career and relationship, and so on and so forth. And the 8th house, since we sort of like have to circle around the block several times just until we really get who we are, what our shadow is all about. So we become more authentic. And I always claim that there is nothing more attractive than people who are authentic. They don't hide. They don't offer you sort of persona, but
Yeah.
it's really endearing and it's disarming. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. It's people who haven't got any side to them. You know what you're dealing with, don't you? It's much easier.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
So the older we get, I mean, it doesn't necessarily holds true for everyone, but certainly to many of us, let's hope so anyway, we do make different choices because we know what's at stake. So if we know more about ourselves, our flaws, as it were, our shadows, and respectively those of any respective partner, potential partner, the relationship can be more fulfilling.
Yeah, definitely. Whole new level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you, I'm just going to turn some lights on and close the door, but you can cut that bit, can't you?
Yeah. No worries.
It's getting darker and darker in here.
It is. It's like midnight already.
There we go. That's better. There we go. Sorry about that.
Never mind.
So what's your favourite out of the whole book? I mean, you've worked through it so many times with The Patience of a Saint. What's your favourite case history? What do you think? Do any of them in particular exemplify what the 8th house is about for you? Or do you like them all?
Yeah. For example, the case study of Princess Beatrice and Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria had 9 children and she lost her husband when she was only 42. And we have a very limited view on Queen Victoria. But if you research on how her life was, you will find that she was a domestic tyrant. She was a very needy person with a very small heart. And she gave all of her small heart to Prince Albert. And she adored him, especially physically. And she wanted to have sex all the time. And he wasn't particularly keen on sex, but you know, there you have it. And of course, in those times, the natural consequence of having sex on a regular basis would be to be pregnant. And she hated being pregnant. She hated small children. She thought they were frog-like with the way they moved, and she thought them ugly. And when her husband died, she lost her companion, her father, her Ersatzvater, because she herself lost her father when she was, I don't know, one month old or so, or even before her birth. I always mix that up, but well, the bottom line is she grew up fatherless. And her children, so the youngest was only 4 years old, Princess Beatrice, called Baby. And Queen Victoria went into this unhealthy sort of clinical mourning depression, which never quite dissolved. And she only let certain members of the family come near to her. And that was Princess Alice, who was 16 at that point, and Princess Beatrice, who was only 4 years old. And she used Princess Beatrice as a sort of mourning toy. So she took the poor infant into her bed. She cuddled her all the time. So you can see it at the picture. So really clingy, horrible. And she didn't allow her to grow up. When Princess Beatrice was a teenager, she looked like a 40-year-old woman. So it's this sort of like premature aging. So she had gout and stuff like that. And her mother obviously out of a vampiric need to suck out the life energy of her. So she aged prematurely, and later when she wanted to marry, Queen Victoria was really angry with her and didn't speak with her for half a year. So what happened was that they sat together at the breakfast table and they exchanged notes, and Queen Victoria not even looking at her daughter. And when Princess Beatrice struggled through and said, I am going to marry no matter what, and she fell in love with an impoverished German cousin of her. And Queen Victoria said, okay, you can marry him, but you're staying with me. Your husband is staying with me, and you are going to be dependent on me, not leaving Windsor Castle ever, which is exactly what happened. And when Queen Victoria died and Princess Beatrice was sort of her secretary, Princess Beatrice blacked out about half of Queen Victoria's diaries and correspondence, and Queen Victoria exchanged alone with her eldest daughter, I think 30,000 letters over 20 years. So she was a triple Gemini, so sun, moon, and ascendant in Gemini. And
Goodness.
Princess Beatrice sort of castrated this. So we don't really know what a rich and contradictory character Queen Victoria was. She was very witty, she was very opinionated, and she didn't want any of that for us to read. So we have a double entendre, if you will, of the 8th house. It's this sucking out, this vampirical sucking out, and then this sort of I'm erasing part of her past and only allowing certain parts to be visible. And that's, it's almost like a detective, if you will, or a criminal. And that's one of my favorite stories. I mean, one of them.
They're all really good. I mean, I really like RuPaul as well. Yeah. Gosh, there's some sad stories, aren't there?
They are sad, but some of them are really encouraging. For example, take that of Tab Hunter or RuPaul or Jane Goodell, who all absolutely soldiered through and became strong, self-reliant, brilliant people, much admired by millions and millions of people. But having said that, they wouldn't be as admirable if they hadn't gone through the struggles of the 8th house. I mean, take RuPaul. When he or she, you can call him or her both, she always says, had her Saturn return, the first at end of 20, he said, I was at my wit's end because I couldn't do anything right. White people looked down on me because I was black. Black people looked down on me because I was gay, and gay people looked down on me because I was too effeminate. So what to do? And well, he decided that he wouldn't change for other people, that he would fit into their boxes. And look at what a huge success he is. And the mantra, if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, is always, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love somebody else? Can I get an amen up in here? And that's a message right from the bottom of Pandora's box, because there is always hope. There is always a good, healthy self-esteem. I don't mean necessarily in form of a narcissistic, overindulgent self-love, but if you can look inside the mirror at the end of the day and say, I am worth loving. I am a good person. I have flaws, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be respected. And well, I call a spade if you cross, if you want to lock horns with me. So yeah, so it's not a nice house, but I think it's the most authentic house because it's so much work involved.
God,
Yeah.
yes. There's me thinking, oh, it doesn't apply to me because I haven't got anything in the 8th house. That's so wrong.
Yeah, but you have a ruler, Margaret.
I do, and it's in the 9th, so I'm publishing. Yay.
So, for example, the ruler of the 8th in the 9th could be that certain life-changing crises might involve matters of faith, because the 9th house is what we believe in, what makes life meaningful to us. It can involve foreign countries or languages. And of course, you are running a worldwide publishing company, which can't be always easy, I presume.
No, it's interesting because I said right from the beginning that if I could sell books on Mars, or if there were authors on Mars, I would be doing it, which is ironic because I've got Mars in Aries in the 7th. Never thought about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's true. It's and I look on the 9th house as a spiritual house, and I've always felt I didn't have any choice about being on a spiritual path.
Yeah.
And it definitely isn't easy. It's only one person wide, and it can be very tough and challenging.
So you have to be like uber self-reliant. You have to count on yourself.
Yeah.
You're the one that counts. You have to pat yourself on the shoulder and say, okay, soldier on, soldier on.
So if the ruler of the 8th is in the 1st, say, for example, does that mean that somebody, that's bringing the energy of the 8th house to the 1st house, isn't it?
Yes.
So does that mean that somebody's relying on another person for their resources? Does that mean they can't exist on their own? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, let's put it that way. Those people are often so they want to know who you are. So they probe, they look you in the eyes in a very intense manner, and they might not give away too much about themselves, but they want to know who you are. So you might want to be on your guard. It's a bit like Pluto in the 1st or Scorpio rising. So it's this question of, I like you, I hate you, but it's never lukewarm. Those people usually polarize. So you can either say, oh, great guy, or what a horrible creature. So it's not nice. These are not nice people. And they are intense and they can be full of passion, but they can polarize. And for example, it would qualify you to be an investigator, a detective, a psychologist, anything having to do with getting to the bottom of things, because these are very shrewd, you know, they know what's happening. If you say, wait a minute, just give me a minute, I haven't taken it in now. So you can't fool these people. Whereas if you take it the other way around, the ruler of the 1st in the 8th, so let's say you have Virgo rising and Mercury in the 8th house, those are people who are automatically plunged into intense relationships and have to deal with what other people want from them and vice versa. So this is from the chapter I call entanglements, which was a word that was new to me because I had to look it up, of course, in German, Verwicklungen, which is sort of like, so you just become entangled.
Well, it's almost like swamped, overwhelmed.
Yes, yes. And that's a very strong image, isn't it? That you can't go out and meet people, or, well, it's not only necessarily about real people, but about fixed ideas. Like, so, I mean, the 8th house is also about coming to terms with the inner world and the outer world. And some people approach us, or we just sort of like attract them, if you will, because they push some of our buttons and challenge us. And we might feel intrigued, we might feel disgusted, but again, we are not impartial. We are not like, yeah, whatever. It's more like, wow, okay, I have to sit down and think this over a minute. So yeah, so that's the other way around. So ruler of the 8th in the 1st, ruler of the 1st in the 8th. And I think it can also be beneficial to play around with these rulership placements, because it gives the chart a deeper additional layer, if you will. So it's a veneer under the veneer, and you say, I always thought, why are these areas in my life so intertwined? That's because of the rulerships,
Yeah. Do you think there is a good planet to be in the 8th house? Or do you think that, obviously that depends a lot on the ruler, doesn't it? I mean, if the ruler of the 8th house is in the 8th house, is that going to make somebody who's incredibly intense?
Yes.
Or would that be a good thing?
Yes. I mean, that holds true for each and every house. So ruler of the 1st in the 1st, ruler of the 2nd in the 2nd, and so on and so forth. But in the case of the 8th house, it's that the deeper subconscious yearning, if you will, motive, finds its fulfillment in the same house. So it's sort of like you start in the 8th and you end up in the 8th. So these might, for example, apply for people who just can't do different than attracting intense relationships, dealing with the values of others, plunging and learning from crises all the time. But what it often brings is a certain natural stamina, inner strength, inner lack of fearfulness. So those people naturally are, so the image I'm always using is, it's like the last man standing on the battlefield.
So in a sense, somebody with that placement is going to, it's almost like they've seen the dark side. Though they know the dark side exists inside of themselves, and they know how to deal with it. They're not frightened, which is going to give them a sense of power, I guess, or perceived power.
Or even they are intrigued by the dark side, because that's also a possibility, that we are attracted by the dark side, by the mystery, by the taboo, by the this is sort of like half criminal even, or you don't do that, no, that's not nice. Because if you look at the other side of the chart, which would be the 2nd house, and the 2nd house is very much where we are creatures of habit, if you will. So this is what belongs to us. This is what I sit on, what I own, what defines me, my talents. Whereas in the 8th house, everything has to change all the time. And you really have to have a liking for that. And several people don't like that at all. They don't like unpleasant surprises. And that's also how we astrologers often come into the picture, because some clients just want to know what's going to happen. Will I be lucky? Shall I marry? Will I inherit? Shall I change job? blah, 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 blah. Because what they can't stand is the sort of ambivalence, like you have two options, but you don't want to shoulder the responsibility of choosing one in favor of the other, because you can make a mistake and, oh, woe is me after that. And the astrologer is supposed to say, yeah, you know, if I were you, I would pick that one, which is actually, for example, when I'm doing a reading, try to shy away from. I try to talk through the opportunities. Yeah. And more often than not, I send my clients with questions away, because who am I to give them the answers? But I can explore the possibilities, and I can say, well, at the moment, or for the next year or so and so, when you look at the solar return and so on and so forth. And that's when you, for example, have the sun in the 8th house in a solar return chart, that's always a big hint that something needs caring. Something is amiss, and you have to resolve it, because at the end of that year, you have to let go of certain issues in order to go on with your life. Time has come to a certain step, if you will, where you have to part ways, either with certain personality traits or certain material values, or even a relationship is at stake. And during that year, when the solar places the sun in the 8th house, yeah, it's not an easy year. It's not a easy peasy lemon squeezy. So okay, so let's sit down and you know, smell the bacon. What's at stake? What's to lose here, and what will happen if I don't part with it? Will my life get
I can feel
worse?
another book coming on. I think there's another book in this. I think you've only just kind of scratched, for me personally, I think that you've only just scratched the surface in this book, and that's what's so fascinating. There's all these other ideas kind of explode in my head.
You know, that's what makes it so worthwhile to do your own research on the 8th house, because literally it's like a funnel. It never ends. It's just and there is a layer beneath that layer, and that layer, and that layer. So that's brilliant. So it never ceases to amaze you, and to challenge you, and to make you feel that humankind is so vulnerable, and yet so very strong and resilient,
and so endlessly fascinating. So you're going to be turning this into an audio book, aren't you?
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit more about your plans for that?
Well, I started out as an actor in my early 20s, and I was an actor on stage, and then I studied psychology. So doing an audio book, I mean, I'm doing lectures all the time, but that's different. And doing this as an audio book is a very intimate affair for me, and I like it a lot, because while reading it aloud into the microphone, another dimension, if you will, unfolds. And of course you can influence by the way, like so a personal choice of what am I going to stress, and where is the rhythm, and so on and so forth. And to me, it's like a whole new take on the book. It's like discovering new angles of it, and I'm having a jolly good time in reading it, because it's brilliant. And I hope, because I am an ardent fan of audiobooks, I listen to audiobooks all the time, be it full cast dramatization or the author reading the book, and so on and so forth. if you close your eyes, or even if you're doing the washing up and have a listen, it's a different dimension, because a voice can invite you to another world. So I, for one, or I listen to podcasts all the time, but to me it's terribly important that I like the voice. So there are some voices which I find uncomfortable, and they say, nah, meh, I don't like it. Whereas others, I say, oh, that's a lovely voice. I wish I could sit with that person down for a coffee or so, because it becomes intimate in a way.
Yeah, adds a lot of power to the subject as well, I think. And I think we were talking at one point about, with astrology books, you can't have the charts. Obviously, if somebody's driving, or if they could look at the book, they would look at the book. But obviously, if they can't, you can't talk a whole chart through, can you? Because they wouldn't retain the information. And also, if they're driving, that's not too good an idea. So how are you going to get around that? Because this is quite a new venture. It's really exciting.
I think there are two ways to approach this. Either because you will be supplied with the data sources, and most of the data can be found at Astrodeans, which is free to find, and you can download and even print it out if you like. So you either do it that way, so you have your printed out chart, or on your iPad or what have you, or you deliberately decide not to know all the chart. So just to take in certain aspects, blah, blah, blah. If I, for example, tell about Doris Day's Venus in the 8th house, and how that came about, also with her problems in marriage, or that her father left her when she was 9 years old, so she had a Sun Chiron conjunction. So it's always like this bits and bobs, and you can sort of like take them in and say, okay, Sun Chiron conjunction, wounded father, or a child being wounded by the father, and in later life seeking men as partners who are wounded, blah, 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 blah. So I think that over the whole book, if you just take in bits and bobs of astrological details, it can do the trick. Or if you really want to know more about that person, look up the chart. It's no mystery, and it's very quickly done, I think. So you can obviously, hold on, Kaiser Wilhelm, let's type that in, blah, blah, blah. And then you said, okay. So we have, I don't know, Cancer rising, Saturn in the 2nd, blah, blah, blah. Or, as I said before, you can not do that. So it's either or you can do, for one chapter, you really want to have a look at the full-blown chart, and for another story, you might deem it unnecessary to know all about it, just to say, interesting, but I think that's enough for me in terms of astrological details. Does that make sense?
That's good, because you don't go into massive detail in all the case studies.
No.
Do you? I mean, you're not going down into sort of really obscure aspects. You're looking at, on the whole, pretty major aspects between people, and synastry between people as well. So that should work really well.
For example, I mean, the last chapter where you have all the combination, I have several examples. So for example, it reads here, so this is the ruler of the 7th and the 8th. French chef Paul Bocuse had Uranus in the 8th as ruler of a crowded 7th house, trine Saturn in the 4th, quincunx Neptune in the 1st house, and square Mars in Capricorn in the 5th house. So if you reckon like, wow, That's loads of information. And I would like to have a look at Paul Bocuse's whole chart. You can look it up, or you can just like soak it in, because the next sentence is, Bocuse came to fame on account of his high quality restaurants and innovative cooking, being one of the most prominent chefs of Nouvelle cuisine. And we all know, so Uranus in the 8th as ruler of a crowded 7th house. And if I was a student or even a full-blown astrologer, and I would make the connection, a crowded 7th house, so definitely a person who needs contact, and who needs contact with the public. In the 8th, so it's going to be about transformation and the values of others, and it's Uranus, so in a sort of innovative way, and he changed, you know, all that. So I think it's sort of, well, I mean, you can have your pick. You can just let it soak in, or you can say, now I want to know the whole story.
So you're giving them the tools to do more, aren't you? So
Yes.
it's like, I think the audiobook is going to be like a taster of what's possible. So it's not going to be verbatim, is it? It's going to be,
I agree,
a kind of a more broad stroke. That's
so,
going to be amazing.
For example, I mean, the way I approach stuff like that is always, I watch a YouTube video, like a documentary, or I read a book, and then I come across the chart on AstroWiki, where there is always the link to the Wikipedia full story, and then a whole sort of image emerges, and you make the connections from the chart to the biography. And that's what I call vivid astrology, because you have the story behind the chart. Because what is a chart without a story? I think Liz Green said, well, it could be the chart of a chicken or of a Ming vase. We don't know that.
Yeah.
It's the story behind that. You see?
It is. Yes, it's a whole immersive experience, isn't it? So the book is also going to shortly be available in the Kindle store in a couple of weeks' time. Brilliant. So you're going to cover all bases. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah. So you can buy it as a physical copy. You can read it as an ebook, or you can have a good listen to the audiobook. So the full package, if you will.
Absolutely. That's what we like to provide, don't we? Well, thank you. Thank you so much for talking and going through it in such detail. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And I will be at the AA conference next week. And one of my lectures will indeed be about the 8th house.
Oh, and there's going to be a big stack of these on the bookstore.
Yes.
And Martin will be doing a book signing.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Definitely. Oops, that was the microphone.
I think that's a good point to finish. Thank you.
It is. Thank you so much for having me, Margaret.
It's been really good.
Yeah, speak to you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye.